In 2008, a Sicilian town put its ruined houses on sale for €1 each. The mayor who signed that off was not an economist and not a city planner. He reviewed art on television. His name was Vittorio Sgarbi, and the town was called Salemi. The idea he invented there is now copied from Sicily to the Alps. In 3 years, he sold not a single house. Not a slow start, not a handful. 0. And the reason is the most boring sentence in this story, which is exactly why nobody tells it. To sell the houses, the town first had to own them. So it took them. Expropriation. The council takes the ruin into public ownership. It stops being somebody's problem and becomes everybody's. And here is the trap. Public property cannot be handed to a private buyer without an official valuation. A valuation of what exactly? A roofless building in a town nobody moves to. The town seized the houses so it could give them away, and could no longer give them away because it had seized them. Sgarbi announced that 10,000 applications had come in. The prefect went looking for them and found no trace. The ruins themselves were real. On the night of the 14th of January, 1968, the ground moved under the Belice Valley. By 2 in the morning, the old centers of the valley's towns were gone. What was left standing stayed standing for decades, inherited by grandchildren who had moved to Milan or Munich or New Jersey, none of whom were coming back to fix a wall. So the town had ruins it could not repair, owners it could not find, and a scheme that produced nothing. 13 years later, Salemi tried again, with one change. This time it did not take the houses. It matched the old owners with the buyers and let them deal directly. 23 offers came in. 13 houses were awarded. The scheme started working the moment the town stopped owning the problem, which should have been the end of it. Except by then, the idea had traveled. In Zungoli on the mainland, the council spent a decade collecting houses. Around 100 of them came into public hands. Almost none came out the other side. Cynthia Andreottola, an opposition councillor, kept asking one question: how many exactly? She never got an answer from her own town hall.
We had to go to the ombudsman to get access to the documents.
To find out what her own council had done with 100 houses, an elected councillor needed an ombudsman. The council also admitted in public that the list of buildings it had seized was full of errors, and that it had only read part of the list, for lack of time. One of the buildings on that list was her own house, the family home she had already repaired with her own money. She says nobody told her. The whole town knew she lived there, and that is the pattern, town after town. Patricia put 38 houses up for sale and sold 2. Musomelli sold 125, or 300, or 450. The number depends on which article you read. Ganji, the town everyone now points to as the success story, managed 3 restored houses in its first 5 years. 3 in 5 years. That was the good example. Then Sambuca, another one of these towns, went to the press, and the press went everywhere. Over 100,000 emails and phone calls came in from around the world. 16 houses were sold, and the winning bid on one of them was €21,000. Sambuca's houses go to auction. €1 is where the bidding starts, not where it ends. It is a headline, not a price. 5 years later, Sambuca ran the whole thing again and raised the starting price by €2. One lot from that round has to be read out loud because a municipal document does not usually contain a phrase like this. The building was reserved for an international center for the integration of peoples, cultures, and world peace. Half the roof had already come down. Asking price, €3. It sold to a man named Paul Canitra for €12,501. Somewhere in a filing cabinet there is a signed protocol judging who deserved world peace, and the winning bid came in at 4,000 times the asking price. The regulations are stranger still. Sambuca's rules include a clause banning relatives of the previous owner from bidding on that same house.
Article 6.7.
Nobody writes a clause like that for no reason. Cinquefrondi asks every buyer for an insurance policy. €250 a year. The penalty for not finishing the renovation is 20,000. on a house that costs €1. Then there is the tax. Registration tax on a second home in Italy runs at 9%, not of what you paid, but of the cadastral value of the building. The state does not accept your euro as a number, it has its own. Then the notary's fixed charges, then the surveyor, then the energy certificate, then the restoration plan. One buyer counted $6,500 in paperwork before a single nail went into a single wall. Meredith Tabone from Chicago finished hers, bid €5,500, bought the house next door for $22,000 more, then rebuilt both of them properly to modern standards. Final figure, around $475,000. A lawyer who does this for a living says most of her clients are American, and that 9 out of 10 people who come to her never make it to the end. Which points to something odd about all of these stories. Every one of them is a purchase. Almost none of them is a sale. Nobody has published what one of these houses is worth on the way out. No named owner, no exit price, no second half of the story. And in Zungoli, while the council held its houses, the town kept losing people. From 1,400 residents to around 900 in a little over 20 years. The whole point of the scheme was to bring people back. So, hidden costs. Fees, taxes, surveyors, a renovation that eats $500,000. That is the answer everybody arrives at. And it is the answer almost every story about these towns gives you. It is also an answer to the wrong question, because the money is not the strange part. The strange part is that the towns are not selling anything. Italy has more than 9.5 million homes with nobody living in them full-time. 27% of all the homes in the country. That number counts the seaside apartment somebody visits in August, so it is not a register of ruins. Nobody keeps a register of ruins. That is part of the problem. An empty building is not a neutral object. It is a running bill. It falls down slowly, onto a street the council is responsible for. Demolishing one small house by trade estimates costs somewhere around €30,000. Most of that is not the demolition. It is carrying the rubble away. So look at what a town actually holds. Not an asset, a liability with a roof. And once you see it that way, the euro stops being strange. It also stops being Italian. In March 2015, British Home Stores was sold for £1. The pension regulator estimated the deficit inside it at £531 million on the day of the sale. 13 months later, the chain collapsed. Around 11,000 people worked there. Barry Football Club, £1, with millions of pounds of debt already on the books. Within a year, it became the first club expelled from the English League since 1992, with its liabilities by then over $12 million. Newsweek, $1, and roughly $47 million of obligations that came with it. And Tata Steel's Scunthorpe Works, £1, plus a £400 million investment package. That buyer took the plant and specifically did not take the pension scheme. One buyer in that whole list left the pension where he found it. Which brings us to a newspaper. In March 2010, Independent News and Media sold The Independent and its Sunday paper for £1, and then paid the buyer £9.25 million.
In installments, over 10 months, in exchange for the buyer taking on every future obligation attached to both titles.
Because the alternative, simply closing both titles, would have cost the company $68 million. So the seller did the arithmetic no Italian council has ever published. $9 million to hand it over. $68 million to keep it and shut it. A price of one coin has never once been a discount. It means the obligation has moved, and the obligation is the entire transaction. The coin is there because a contract needs a number, which is why the euro was never the offer. The renovation deadline was the offer. The €20,000 penalty was the offer. The clause about the relatives was the offer. It also explains the thing that looked like failure. Zungoli did not fail to sell 100 houses. Zungoli succeeded in acquiring 100 liabilities. People asked for the houses. The paperwork almost never got finished. Salemi only sold when it stopped owning the problem. Zungoli never stopped owning it. There is one more step down this ladder, and Italy is taking it. Some places have gone past free. Locana pays families up to 9,000 euros over 3 years, if the children go to the village school. And Ololai in Sardinia ran the plain €1 version for 10 years. 150,000 inquiries came in. It sold about 9 houses, which leaves the television art critic looking better than anyone gave him credit for. He was wrong about the mechanism, wrong about the paperwork, and nobody ever found the 10,000 applications. He was right that somebody would take the houses if the price was low enough. He just never went low enough.